Welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing great. Thanks, Will.
And today we have joining with us both Jessica Lussenhop. Nailed it. Who's an investigative reporter with ProPublica, where she covers systemic failures in institutions that affect vulnerable communities, as well as Andy Mannix, who was formerly an investigative reporter with the Minnesota Star Tribune and is now a ProPublica employee, where he focuses on criminal justice, public institutions, and accountability. And together, they both reported on an investigation of sexual abuse and institutional silence within a church in Minnesota called the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church. And we're so happy to have you both join us today. Welcome to Faithful Politics.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So Andy, you're in Minnesota currently, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask, how is the snow there?
I want to make a joke of like it's better than the ice or something, but people to read too much into it. It is very cold here. It's probably one of those too cold to snow kind of situations. But yeah, it's generally we're all kind of hanging by a thread here. I think it's been a hell of a past few weeks, and it's been a hell of a past 5 or 6 years for Minneapolis. I think everyone's sort of reckoning with the fact that Minnesota is in the national and international spotlight. Once again, wow. we like to be, we don't like to be front and center. We like to be like the understated, cool state. So it feels, just for context, I think what might be helpful is to think of like Minneapolis isn't that big of a city, and we've got 3,000 plus ICE agents here. It's not like New York City or Chicago. That outnumbers our police department. There's 600 police officers right now. So I think everyone is just sort of feeling like, really on edge right now. And I think that people would have said that. I know they were saying it before, Brene Good was shot and killed. Everyone kind of felt like it was building towards something. And now here we are a couple weeks later with 2 additional shootings and another fatal one that's really driving a lot of questions about these ICE tactics. So it's kind of hard to focus on anything else.
Yeah.
So can I just ask real quick, and I don't want to take too much time on this, but I walk in conservative circles. I definitely consider myself a conservative. No one who listens to our program for any length of time would say I'm MAGA. They know my opinions on Donald Trump. They know my opinions on MAGA and my opinions on Christian nationalism, all the stuff that comes with that. I've been very vocal about that here. But I do hold very conservative values, I think, as far as I understand them. And in the conservative circles that I run in, people might look and say, literally people saying, oh, they're making this up. This is woke, like left, liberal, propaganda. This is, the person was an assassin. They wanted, and again, this is literally 2 days after a killing. That's when we're making this, recording. Mm-hmm. 2 days. And so really the information is not all out there, although there's an avalanche of information that's available. And so it's like all being sorted out. And yet we have a government already claiming that it's a domestic terrorist within hours, I think, of the event itself. And I'm just wondering, like, what's the response for someone who's like, why should I believe you? Why should I believe what you're saying? Why should I believe? Just the skeptic that comes on here. And we have many people that watch this on YouTube. Given from the comments, there are quite a few skeptics and people from all sorts of walks that are looking at this. And I know it's going to sound silly, but can you just entertain me and give the proof for why, like, what's happening is actually happening from your perspective and why we should believe it? I know that maybe that sounds silly, but I think it's important.
When I started covering police 15, 20 years ago, there was a lot more of these types of incidents that were like, that didn't even really get covered because, we'd have an official account and we'd have a witness saying something and it was just like a he said, she said. We've lived in this world for a little while now where we actually have, real time video that often we have access to within sometimes minutes or hours after an event like this. It's funny because, as we talk about as journalists and especially as investigative journalists of how to cover this story, there's a question of like, well, what don't we know? Because we know a lot, and I guess this is a long walk up to saying, I think people can watch those videos for themselves. And do we know everything that happened before? Absolutely not. And I think that those are the questions that are still unanswered. But I hear Greg Bovino and Kristi Noem and others in the administration, Stephen Miller said this is an assassin. I don't think that the video supports that. I think if you watch the video, was this guy armed? Yeah, and what we're told from the governor and police chief here, or I'm sorry, the mayor and police chief is he was legally able to have that gun. He purchased it legally, and you're allowed to conceal and carry in public in Minnesota. But the idea that he brandished it as Secretary Noem said, that's just not in the video. But I would urge the skeptics to watch it for themselves. I think as journalists and as citizens, we have an obligation to sort of scrutinize what the government is telling us and decide for ourselves if we're going to believe it. And I would encourage people to do that in this case. I think that there's always, having covered a lot of these, and when I say these, I mean, shootings or killings involving police officers, there often is more to it than we realize. Not everything just like happens in a vacuum. There is something that precipitated it. There were things going on that we didn't understand because we weren't there, and you can't get everything from a video. And for me and anyone else listening, I would say, we need to be cautious about thinking we know everything. But we do know more than nothing, right? And I think it's, I think it's just really hard to take some of the statements that we're hearing from the government and compare it to that video, and it's they're sort of asking you to not believe what you're seeing with your own eyes, and in some cases, but I think people can decide for themselves. But like, is ICE here? Is ICE using aggressive tactics? I'm just speaking objectively here, like that. There's no question. I mean, there's no question that ICE is being very aggressive toward people who want to film them, who want to, who would call themselves legal observers, who would say, I'm trying to, keep a legal distance between me and you, but I want to record you. It's very clear that these agents do not like that, and in some cases have retaliated against those people, either threatening them or detaining them. And there's plenty of video evidence of that as well. To me, it doesn't seem like a conservative or liberal position, to say we should scrutinize what the government says against the facts. But
I do, and we will get to your reporting about the church. But just one quick follow-up question about the tactics for law enforcement. Like, what are those tactics that you're referring to? Because I think that's probably a piece that most Americans haven't really even seen. I mean, short of like using your firearm on an American, sure, but are there other things outside of that that might be important for us to know?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, none of this is happening in a vacuum, and we're seeing bits and pieces of it and not the whole picture. But a lot of people here want to record ICE, want to maybe tell them in not uncertain terms that they don't want them here, and want to follow them and see where they're taking. There's not, I mean, there isn't a lot of public record around these arrests. Not like if it were like Minneapolis police, there'd be a police report. The law mandates that certain things be public. So a lot of people are saying, we're going to follow these people to see where they're taking them, to tell their family or whatever. And no doubt there are people who just want to disrupt and delay ICE as best as they can because they don't agree with them being here. But there's certain ways that you can respond to that. That's, Minneapolis police have dealt with quite a lot of this, with these kinds of critics who are trying to like get their attention essentially, right? And a lot of good officers you'll see will try to de-escalate that situation. They'll either try to ignore them entirely or sort of have a conversation with them and engage them, human to human. And I've seen a lot of good police officers doing that over the years. I'm sure that there are plenty of examples of Minneapolis police officers not doing that. But I think that's what their training would suggest. What we see with ICE is them really not turning the other cheek. Like you have a lot of incidents where they say, okay, this person is following me on a public street. So I'm going to look up their license plate number and then I'm going to take them actually to their own home. And then I'm going to start filming them and I'm going to film their license plate number. And a lot of people see that as like a threat of like, well, look, now I know where you live. So there's that, there's use of pepper spray, different kinds of chemical irritants. There's people who we're hearing about who are being detained who are, like clearly American citizens, people with IDs, stuff like this, but they're talking back to the ICE agents and they're choosing to detain them. And then, maybe they're released later that day, but they go on like an 8 to 12 hour ride in the meantime. I think there's a lot of in moments where you could either escalate, ignore, or de-escalate. There's a lot of reporting out there that suggests that they're looking to escalate, including, many of your listeners maybe have seen that video of a police officer pulling someone over. I think it was the day or two after Renee Good was killed, and basically said, didn't you learn your lesson these last couple days? So I think that posture is very threatening and is very like, we're not gonna sit back and let you criticize us, and it's leading to a lot of altercations. I mean, you can kind of see protesters, ICE agents both being aggressive and sort of colliding. Now we've got the National Guard here, and the Army is on standby in Alaska to parachute into Minneapolis. There's just like a lot of ingredients, I think, for this thing to continue to blow up or, to slow down. Like, I think, there's a lot of calls for putting a pause on things today. And we're seeing some signs that the administration is receiving that. So I have no idea what's going to happen next. But there are a lot of, I think, ingredients for this, the kind of altercations we've seen to continue happening, I think.
Yeah, it seems like Minnesota has a lot of moving pieces that it's like all the attention in Minnesota is happening wherever ICE is. But you wrote a story, I believe, last November that talked about something else that was happening in Minnesota that dealt with a church, a Lutheran church in particular. And I want to kind of switch gears just so we can kind of just talk about that because it's
Good
also
segue.
important. Thank you. I've been working on it. Been thinking about it actually back in my mind.
Yeah, that actually was really good. I was like, man, I want to hear what Jessica has to say, but I know we got to get to this. But I was like, man, that's a really good segue. Good job.
Here's the thing about segues. Never make the segue so good that people point out how good it is. And I think I made that mistake. So anyways,
shoot,
with your reporting on the church and whether it's you or Jessica, I'm curious, like, number one, just give us sort of high level, what is the story about? And then two, how did it end up on your respective radars?
Jessica, I've talked enough.
I can kick us off. So probably the easiest way to tell the story is just like, where did this come from? So I got a tip from a source. This is gonna be edited, right? I got a tip about a court case. Andy and I were based in Minneapolis. This came from Duluth, which is about 2.5-ish hours north. Beautiful town on Lake Superior, but a decent distance away from us. So it's not as if I was following, the court happenings up in Duluth super carefully. But I had maybe heard a little about a story that just said, a man who has been accused of sexually abusing young girls in a church up in Duluth. He's decided to plead guilty, and it was just kind of a short run-of-the-mill daily crime story. But not too long after after that story came out, I got a tip from someone saying, you really got to look at the church. Like, this is sort of the very, very surface of this situation in Duluth. This church, the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church in Duluth, had a hand in suppressing reports of child abuse that have been going on for years. This is a part of a very troubling culture, not just in Duluth, but in this faith in general, which does have locations across the country and in Canada. And it would be essentially a mistake for this one person, this one perpetrator, Clint Massey, to plead guilty, go to prison, and for everyone to kind of just forget about it and move on with their lives. There's way more to this, and you guys need to look into it. I took that tip very seriously. I reached out to authorities in St. Louis County, which is the county where Duluth is located. And I think what was striking to me is I believe I spoke to the lead investigator for the St. Louis County Sheriff's Department first. And typically, when you call law enforcement, you want to talk about, a crime story that's in the news. They're somewhat limited in what they can say. And he was, because, not everything had been adjudicated and everything. But in a very, very brief conversation, he essentially said to me, I really can't go on the record right now, and I can't tell you a lot other than what's, public right now. But as soon as Clint Massey is sentenced, kind of like, I'm all yours. Like, whatever you want to know, I am a resource. I will, and that's just not something, there's a tense relationship at times between law enforcement and journalists. And so I am not accustomed to getting that kind of reception, especially in the first phone call when there's really no relationship between me and that law enforcement officer. But the fact that he said almost immediately, as I recall, it was a very short conversation, like maybe 10 minutes. Him saying to me, I will do anything in my power to help you tell this story, was like, oh crap, like something is going on here. And I think I, not terribly long after that conversation, managed to gather what was publicly available in the court record, realized that what we're actually looking at was, not just this one man's crime and this man's alleged crimes, took place over the course of decades in multiple states. And the fact that we were already kind of hearing and it goes beyond this person and it goes beyond this state, I pretty quickly realized I didn't feel like this was a project for just one reporter. And Andy and I have been friends and former colleagues going back 10 plus years. We worked together at an alternative news weekly in Minneapolis. He was at the Star Tribune. I was at ProPublica at the time. And I just thought we've been trying to get the band back together anyway, wanting to work together on something. And I just thought that this was it and that I needed backup. Wow. And so that's how this all kicked off.
That's super, super cool. And I'm going to bring this out and I'd love to hear obviously your take on this and we can just kind of jump back and forth if you feel like you have something. Then, after each question, we'd love to hear both of your responses if you feel like you have something. So just so you kind of get a sense of that. Sure. But so what I'm hearing and what I understand from the review of the articles is that we have this abuse, this very bad abuse that's now come out, and you were digging into this, trying to figure out, and what you see is there's an internal, there's something, it's not just one person, there's a systemic issue here. And that's actually creating an environment where this kind of abuse not only can occur, but even grow and even maybe spread. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, but I'd love for you to kind of work through what were these mechanisms and these systems? How did this happen? Essentially, what did you find out?
Yeah, I think So after Jessica and I got together, I think the first question we had was like, if it's an investigative story, then there has to be some kind of unresolved accountability here. And Clint Massey was, let's see, he had pleaded guilty, I believe, right? By the time we started. So, in a way, he was already being, I mean, not in a way, he was already being held accountable by the criminal justice system. And, you could say that it took a lot longer than it probably should have. But that's often the case, I think, with criminal justice stories like this. So
And sexual abuse cases in particular.
and sexual
too.
abuse cases, absolutely, involving children especially.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so what we kind of set out to look for was there, either through the church or law enforcement, like, is there someone to be held accountable? Like, is there someone who could have stopped this and didn't, or who facilitated it? Or, sometimes in the case of a law enforcement story, like, did they kind of botch it, right? Did they botch an investigation, and therefore it was allowed to go on for a lot longer? What we quickly realized with this, especially after we started getting public records, but was that our focus would be on these, what we've just come to call forgiveness sessions, where you have people who are leaders in the church who are pulling, our story starts out with a girl who's, I think she was in middle school or post or kindergarten or so when between 5 and 6, I think, when she was pulled into the session with her father, her preacher, and the man that she had told her parents was sexually abusing her. And she was, made to forgive him, forget about it, never talk about it again, and hug him at the end, which you can imagine was a really horrifying experience. So that practice, I think, quickly became the focus of the story, because we're like, this is where the church sort of allowed this to happen. In addition to not reporting him, the forget part is really key to this doctrine, right? So the forgetting part means you never talk about it again. So you don't tell anybody. Otherwise the sin is on you, and there's a lot of power, I think, with that, especially with a kid, of like, this, you don't want to go to hell, you don't want to be an outsider in your community because you're breaking the rules. It was clear that this girl felt a lot of pressure to not tell anybody. And what did that lead to? First of all, more kids getting abused, right? After that, like if you looked at, okay, it's been going on for a long time, but this girl came forward and the preachers know they could have stopped it then. They didn't. It continued to happen. And meanwhile, the not talking about it is sort of like, I think she told the police something along the lines of it was almost worse than the abuse itself, leading to a lot of really serious and undiagnosed for a long time mental health issues, clearly contemplating ending her life, things like this. And it was just like, that was the pain and suffering she endured because she had to hold all of this in and never tell anybody about it. So I think that became kind of our line of reporting, and the question that we often asked people were, is this just one preacher? Is this one case? Or is this happening more broadly? And everyone we talked to said this is kind of the norm. This is happening a lot more commonly than just this one girl in this one case. So yeah, that, for us as investigative reporters, we really want to figure out, like, where is that onus of accountability? And I think, for the most part, that was, we wanted to place that on the church and sort of show how they could have stopped this and didn't, and it ended up leading to more and more kids getting hurt.
Yeah, Jessica, earlier you made a comment that this is a church that is, I don't know, in other countries or maybe in other parts of this country. Like, what do you know about the church and maybe their theology or anything like that?
So that was also an interesting part of this project, because there's really not a lot that you can Google Old Apostolic Lutheran Church, and there's a Wikipedia page, and there's an official website that they have. One of the things that I did first when we started looking into this, and which I thought was interesting, was that there was on the OALC's website, there's like a tab that's like books or like literature or something, and I can't remember if like and it was like, oh, you could buy certain books that will explain our faith to you, and you would click on the link and it doesn't work, or it would like send you an email. It was just like there was no way to actually like acquire written down information about how the church operates. And so the more we sort of looked into it, we realized that there's really not a lot of information that, in the internet age, it's just crazy that you can't simply Google something and learn the ins and outs and everything about it. Mostly what we were finding were kind of Web 1.0 type message boards with former members of the church calling out some of these very same issues and saying, I feel like I just left a cult. It took everything I could muster to get out. There's a lot of abuse happening and a lot of silencing going on. So while we can't actually find out some of the core tenets of how does this faith work, just that's all we're looking for, what we are finding are, some of them very old accounts of people calling out some of the same things we're being told in 2025. So that was, that's a bit of a red flag if you're looking into a faith tradition or a faith community that is kind of operating away from the public eye in sort of these insular communities. And they don't seem to, again, this is from former members who we've interviewed quite a lot of them, is that sort of writing things down and reading for yourself and thinking for yourself are not the kinds of activities that are exactly encouraged. I mean, I'm fast forwarding way too much, but like when we actually did go to a service at the church, when we walked in, they gave us a little pamphlet that was like understanding our faith or something, and it was like maybe 10 pages, and I was so excited to be holding something in my hands in writing that's going to affirm or in any way, like it's just, I just felt like just holding it in my hands, I was like, we're not making this all up, it's real, like and some of the stuff in that pamphlet affirmed what we'd been told over and over and over again from former members of the church. So just figuring out the faith itself was a challenge. And then from there, I get, like Andy was kind of saying, I think one of the things that jumped out to us very early on was the forgive and the forget sort of practice, because I think sometimes, I'm a journalist and I'm a geek for movies about journalism. So like we've all seen Spotlight, and like, like sort of in a post-Catholic church sex abuse scandal world, you think, oh, you like members, clergy, preachers, leaders of faith communities know that this can blow up and just become a huge problem. And to, in 2024, I guess when this started, and in 2025, to be confronting a faith community where preachers know, and we have on the record admitting that they have known about multiple victims and have known for years, and just been like, that's not really what we do here. What we do is just facilitate forgiveness, and then we're done here. That was shocking, and really, was sort of, some of that shock really propelled a lot of our reporting from there.
If I could just add one thing to what Jessica was saying about, how people sort of engage with this faith that are in it. So at least one person has told me, and maybe several, that they were told not to read the Bible because they might misunderstand it. Only the preachers are supposed to read the Bible, and then they tell them, what it means. So there is just sort of this. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and so that's kind of my basis for understanding some of these dynamics of a religion and how they work and the power that it can have on a community. And that, I remember that being really shocking to me, saying you shouldn't read the Bible. We were, say what you want about Catholicism, but I've never heard of anyone saying you can't read the Bible because you're not going to understand it. So they do want people to, I think, what do they call it, Jessica, a childlike faith. They want people to sort of listen, but not try to understand too deeply.
Bringing the wonder and acceptance of a child, throughout your entire life to your faith.
I'd love to give, do you guys mind if I give you some thoughts on that?
Sure.
Please.
So, just, and the only reason I'm saying this is because I literally have just been talking about this. Like, I'm a pastor, and so I teach every Saturday night. We actually do church on Saturday nights. And so, and I give opportunity for people to ask questions and kind of, disagree, whatever. Like, I kind of feel like that's important in our age. And so I kind of give that opportunity for people to do that. And just so it's not just, hey, listen to me, right? But process it. But one of the things we talk about is, that we have talked about is the Bible can be pretty confusing and misunderstood and misinterpreted, right? And so part of it is you want to do that private reading, but then you want to bring that to the community. And so it's both, right? It's a mixture of those two things. If it's too much just myself, then you can kind of start to get into your own world and thinking that God might confirm things that aren't actually true. And then on the other side, right, you can get authoritarian where my view is the only one that matters. And I just think that that's interesting, like that this was like a sign, because I agree. It's like, what are you trying to get people to think and hear and understand? And it kind of brings up this point, like, that I think is important to bring out, because I know that there's parts of this investigation, like I think there's a police recording or something where like this preacher was saying things in their own words, and I would love to talk more about that, but I want to bring in this idea of like the leaders knew what was going on, correct? What does that mean that they knew, and what did they do with that information? Like, what did they do? Nothing. I mean, you said that they went through a process where they had some forgiveness process, but, how did they do, like, what was the internal process like and how did they feel like they actually dealt with it? Or I don't know. Does the question make sense?
Yeah. For sure.
Okay.
I think that, like, one thing that I want to say, and I actually just pulled up my electronic booklet, my PDF of the booklet they gave us, just so that I'm not misquoting them, but because I think that some of this actually sounds kind of nice. Like, they say, for some, our Sunday services may be perceived as plain. We encourage, there's no prepared sermon. They, like Jesus and his disciples, we sing without musical accompaniment. Like, when we went to church, the church itself was it was a big building, but very plain. There's no stained glass. There's no big crosses. There's no like art of any kind. It's just very spare. And this maybe feels like it has nothing to do with your question, but it's kind of like that spareness and that sort of like lack of kind of like bureaucracy and infrastructure and all this stuff. I feel like that's sort of like is reflected in this a little bit, like trying to keep things really, really simple. And so when we talk about like, how did these children disclose to their preachers, it's not like, it came organically. So for example, the young lady in the lead of our story, the woman who went through what we've called a forgiveness session, she wound up at the attention of law enforcement because she couldn't keep what had happened to her inside anymore. She was in such emotional turmoil that she had gone to therapy, and the therapist is a mandatory reporter, and so that's how it finally kind of comes to light. What had happened prior to that? Yeah, over a decade roughly later. What had happened before that, and the reason she was in therapy describing how she had tried, what had happened to her when she was very, very young was so disturbing to her that she told her mom, and the mom either talked to her husband or went to the preachers, because that's ultimately kind of in this community, as we understand it, the preachers are kind of the ultimate authority aside from God. What they tell you to do, their advice on all kinds of mundane matters, like buying a car, where to go to school, things that are more important, who to marry. You have to go to the preachers and you have to ask what they think before you do kind of anything. The parent of one of these alleged victims even told me, like, you're just taught not to think for yourself. I mean, she's had to reflect on her role in all of this and has since left the church and said, it's just, don't think for yourself. Go talk to a preacher, do what the preacher says. And so I think a lot of these disclosures, some of them were children going to parents and parents being like, well, we don't call 911. We go to the preacher. They go to the preacher
if they should call 911. Yeah.
Right. in some cases, I think Andy's done more reporting on that at this point than I have. But just what do we do? It's not call 911, it's call the preacher. And from the reporting that we've done and from multiple victims' accounts from the Massey case in particular, the advice has always been to forgive and then we're done here. And so that is sort of like this like kind of one size fits all approach to these allegations, and it kind of stops there. Now, in fairness, is that always what happens? No, there was actually a case that we learned about that happened a couple years before the Massey case where a man was prosecuted for sexually abusing his own kids, and a pastor was involved in sort of facilitating that coming out to law enforcement. So it's not as if law enforcement is never involved. We do have at least one case in Minnesota that we know of where there did seem to be an effort on the part of the church to involve law enforcement. But from everything we're reading in the Massey case, what we were seeing in these early days was over and over and over again, victims being sent to the preacher, being told, like, this is the way we deal with problems, is to forgive them. And that's just it. That's all that there is to it. And I think where law enforcement finally comes in is a sort of critical mass of these girls who become women and have been suffering with these memories for so long that it all kind of breaks out into the open because they just kind of can't follow that doctrine anymore. It's too painful.
You know, when we talk to sexual abuse survivors,
that's breathtaking, by the way. Sorry, well, that's breath, like in like a horrible way. Like that's so horrible.
Yeah, it is. It is pretty terrible. And when we talk to folks that have lived underneath those types of systems, like one of the things that always comes up is there's like a certain kind of religious language that gets used that helps kind of like cement the authoritarianism. Because I mean, when you go to a church, right, you go to church, build community, explore your faith, you know, but then you end up adopting kind of all the things that the church does. And one of the things is sort of the leadership of the church, you know, via the pastor. So, and the pastor, I'd imagine, would have a lot of control over the congregants, especially if they start using, well, you know, if you go to the cops, like God's gonna be mad at you because like there's only one pastor in the church, right? Or somebody that understands the Bible better than probably everybody. So like what type of like religious language did you hear, or, you know, and if you have like scriptures that you jotted down, that would also be probably pretty telling. I'd just love to hear more about sort of like the religious angle.
I mean, I can scan this quickly and grab some stuff, but I think that this is sort of like, this was written, I think, for outsiders. So it doesn't go super deep. Again, it was really hard to find stuff that's written down about what which is what made, you know, even though we were hearing kind of the same thing from former members of the church over and over and over again, because we're reporters and we think about, like, you know, trust but verify, it was, you know, hard to find things that are written down. And so getting this document at such a late stage in our reporting was like part of why I felt so grateful, because it, you know, what, like, for example, like forgiveness is sort of a thread, you know, that runs through kind of everything as we understand it that the OALC believes, which again sounds nice. When we went to a service at the very end, they towards the end of it, kind of everybody stands up and asks each other for forgiveness and asks the preachers for forgiveness. It's sort of this collective, sort of very loud, a lot of crying and wailing. And we had heard about how disturbing that was from kids. Like, they were, when I was a kid and this part would start, I would get scared because I didn't really understand what was happening. And they would say things like, and this is a ritual, or not a ritual, but this is a part of the service that was called movements. And that was something that, like, I just have it in front of me, like, the sorrow over sin and joy over God's incomprehensible grace are at times expressed in so-called movements, just like the Bible tells us that it happened then. So it's like things that we were being told that we couldn't find in writing, we suddenly have in writing. So that was one of, you know, many just sort of small things that are just like, okay, like we actually can believe what some of these women are telling us. I don't know, Andy, can you think of another example?
Yeah, and that movement's lasted probably about 40 minutes or so. It was like a 3-hour service. So it was kind of like, very, very interesting to see, I guess. Um, yeah, and you were asking just like other language that they use.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, we cover Christian nationalism here a lot,
Hmm.
and a lot of the language we hear in Christian nationalism, like armor of God and shield and sword and iron
Yeah.
sharpens iron. Like that. There's a lot of sort of like imagery that gets used that's based in the Bible that gets people going.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if any of that kind of stuff existed there.
There's an interesting term that a few people told us about, called the walking staff, which is basically like you are walking through life on a path, and you need the staff to kind of help you stay on the right path, and how you do that is through like forgiveness. So it's not like Catholicism or other churches where there's like this sacrament where you go in and ask a priest for forgiveness. You can ask anybody in the church for forgiveness. So people would tell us a lot of but they really are like, if you're not on this path, if you're not using your walking staff, then you're gonna stray, and obviously hell is the punishment for straying too far. And I think that is such a powerful sentiment for especially young people. There's this one detail that I really wanted to get in our first story, and I think it got cut. But this girl told me that she listened to a Taylor Swift song before bed, which she was not supposed to do, and was horrified that she was going to die in her sleep, and she would go to hell because she wouldn't have a chance to ask somebody for forgiveness. So yeah, I do think that forgiveness and the language around it is really powerful in terms of like motivating people to do certain things. Um,
I don't think
yeah,
that there's, I think that there's, I think if you read this booklet and if you go to ProPublica's website and read some of our stories, I hyperlink to it, so it's available for anybody to read it. I don't think if you read this thing that you would necessarily, unless you were looking for certain things, know that this is the language of, like, a lot of it comes across as pretty gentle. I'll like read another small thing in here. We Christians want to follow Jesus' example and live a life that is simple and modest, whether it be in our dress, our home, or our way of life. We do not believe it is right, nor do we have a need to engage in worldly pleasures, alcohol, and other drugs. The friendship we have in the church is so much more. It's pretty gentle language. It's not swords and shields and a march on whatever. But I think what this, and then if you go a little further, we don't want to follow the latest fashions, use makeup, wear jewelry, or decorate our homes with unnecessary ornaments. The women want to keep their hair long, as the Bible teaches. Again, that's not the language overtly of any type of control. I think what undergirds this, though, is sort of again, I think that's why I keep coming back to like nothing being written down. It also plays out a little bit what Andy was talking about, which is that a certain amount of cutting off people from information and from culture. So not being allowed to listen to music, not being allowed to dance, not being allowed to watch TV or movies. People talked about not being allowed to have TV in their homes, but a lot of people seem to have a TV in the closet. So like, so, and like, which is also like, there are weird ways that those rules are bent a little bit. Like when we went to church, I saw a lot of people wearing Apple Watches. Like they clearly use the internet. It's not like a complete cutting off of any relationship with modern society, but being sort of selective about where information comes from, what is considered sinful to listen to, participate in, what kind of information forms are themselves sinful, also including like watching sports, things that are not intuitively sinful. But also I think there's this gender element that also undergirds a lot of what we were reporting on, and what obviously came out in the sexual abuse of these women is the like long skirts, long hair, no jewelry, no tattoos, no piercings. You can't do anything to sort of adorn yourself as a woman, and you have to dress very modestly, and that's a form of control in terms of like, you have to be chaste, you have to be pure, you are never to question anyone whether, I mean, obviously your preacher is someone very important in your life. And there are, as far as we understand it, no women in any real leadership roles in these churches. But, that also goes to any man who's a member of the community that you're encountering. Like, you are inherently less than he is. You are less than your father. You're less than your brothers. Like, so it's, again, I think if you read the exact language in the scant resources that we have that sort of lay out some of this doctrine, it's a gentle way of describing things. But I think if you look and you know what to be pulling at, you are seeing a faith that is sort of cut off from modern society, where women are inherently seen as less important and less important than men, and that just sets up a hierarchy that I think primes it for sort of a sexual abuse scandal like the one that we have been writing about.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, just to add to that, the word Lutheran is in the name, but it's really not Lutheranism as we would think about it in the mainstream. It's a Laestadianism is the umbrella that this falls under, which is named after a guy named Lars Laestadius, who was sort of like a botanist explorer from Sweden in the 19th century, and he and so it's a very kind of like return to an older way of living, I would say, a simple way of life sort of philosophy, in which there is a lot of misogyny, I think, baked into that. So the service we went to didn't include any language like this, but we did find some other sermons that people who had attended the church, including former members, had posted, and there was a lot of talk of like the devil's teat and like sort of images that you would say are probably unflattering to women, and a lot of sort of kind of there's a guy who wrote a book who was about Laestadianism, and he had grown up in a different branch of it, and it's called an examination of the pearl, and he talks about the first time he went to an OALC church coming from a different branch of Laestadianism. He was kind of shocked at some of the old school language that they would use in these sermons in regard to women and things like this. So yeah, I think that I just wanted to throw that out there, that the church has ties to, I think, the official church of Sweden still. They have people from Sweden and other countries in that region that they call missionaries. Do I have that right? Or is that maybe
there's elders, there's missionaries.
Yeah,
I think we had a little bit of again, it's not like you can call up their headquarters and interview someone who's going to
get the PDF of this.
I'll
in
send
clear
you a link.
English.
Yeah.
But there's no structure to this. Again, like it's sort of ad hoc. There's no seminary. Preachers are sort of just like pointed out and said, okay, you're a preacher now. Like, it's not, there's no training involved.
No certificates.
And they but these these preachers from Sweden and Finland come here every 4 years, and they have a translator, and they go to the churches in America. So there is still ties to that Swedish, Finland influence that I think is really strong in the church still.
And some reporting that I think Andy is still pursuing, because we started this project out by like, let's start with this one case and build out from there. And so that's like kind of trying to understand these international ties and how they play out in modern times. It's something that is we're still kind of working on.
It is, because as Jessica says, they kind
Sounds
of are
complicated.
On paper very disconnected. In fact,
but relationally, it sounds like they're very deeply connected. There's enough so that they can bring people from Sweden.
Yeah.
They have enough of a relational network, right, to be able to do things like that. At least pay for tickets or whatever, or however they get to housing, or enough communication, it would seem.
But even we've talked to victims who have sued the church, and they're like, who do we even sue? You know, do I sue the OLC in Minnesota?
Sounds like Antifa.
I guess. And, you know, do I sue there is an OLC of America?
Who do we sue?
They're like, we don't know anything about what's going on in Duluth. So
That's wild.
It is a very confusing structure. And if you look at, you know, like tax documents for the church in Duluth, they're filing tax documents that say, well, we bring in under like $50,000 a year or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's really, so you're like, is this, I mean, they present as a very, very kind of mom and pop organization of, you know, what they call like lay preachers, you know, not professional preachers that are sort of just like gathering to share, you know, in their beliefs. But yeah, there is, I think, more of a sophisticated structure there that, again, we don't fully understand yet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to kind of turn the conversation here for our remaining time. Probably this will move in different directions, but I want to talk about the police recording that you guys, Jessica, I think you reported on specifically. And what happened? What did the police, like, what did that reveal? Because we didn't have anything written down, right? But now we have a police recording of an actual recording of a man being asked questions that are very direct, very leading. And so what kind of describe that for us? And essentially, what did the pastor say and what happened to the pastor?
So the recording you're talking about was definitely sort of a reporting breakthrough, I would say, because we have from the criminal case against, again, the perpetrator's name was Clint Massey, and from those records from his case, we've got, you know, all these women who are describing encounters with him that are remarkably similar. The other thing a lot of them had in common was the police saying, well, did you tell anybody? And then they say, well, I talked to my parents and I talked to my preacher, or my parents talked to my preacher, or 10 years later, as an adult, I got so upset, I talked to my preacher. And that man's name was Daryl Bruckelmeyer, is Daryl Bruckelmeyer. So Daryl Bruckelmeyer is one of the leaders of this Duluth church, and there are several. There's not sort of just one lead preacher. There's a group of them. But he is one who, again, from our interviews, was particularly well respected in this church in Duluth. And when, you know, you're coming to the preachers with a problem this big, like my child is telling me they are being sexually abused, they're going to Preacher Bruckelmeyer. So again, we have all these accounts, and we had reached out to Mr. Bruckelmeyer to see if he would talk to us, and he said no. He said no a number of times. But then we get this recording, and it's about 45 minutes of him discussing this case with St. Louis County Sheriff's Department officers. And I think when we got the recording, I was just excited to hear his voice. I wanted to see him, and I really didn't know what to expect. But I think what I sort of assumed was that this was going to be sort of a 45-minute circular conversation where Bruckelmeyer would just be like, yeah, no, I didn't know anything about this, and this is all news to me. This is awful. I'm just horrified to hear about this. And almost immediately, there's a recognition that, well, yes, I have known about these girls' accounts. I've known for years. And in one exchange that I found, you know, I was very sort of surprised by, the lead investigator said something like, how many of these girls would you say have come forward to you over the years? And he said, only a few. 1, 2, 3, which just sort of hit like, just 3 is sort of, that was sort of like the point where I was just like, like what is happening here? Where little girls are coming to you and telling you about the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and you've heard it once, and that wasn't interesting enough to you. You've heard it 3 times, and you're still just kind of like, only 3. Like, so that to me was like, okay, so we're not in the realm where none of what these women are talking about never happened, and you are confirming that you've known for years that this abuse was going on. And their defense in that recording at the time was, well, we thought that Minnesota law says as members of clergy, we don't have to disclose this stuff. And we just didn't understand. Kind of in various ways, they just keep saying, we just didn't understand the law. We thought that, this is essentially amounts to a confession, and I don't have to tell the police anything that happens in confession. And the law enforcement officers in this recording say very explicitly, if Clint Massey came to you, Preacher Bruckelmeyer, and said one-on-one in confession, I have done these things, that's protected. But if you have little girls coming to you, if you have little girls' parents coming to you, if you then convene a group setting where it's the perpetrator, you, the parents, and the child, that is not protected. That is a group setting where a crime is being disclosed, and you have to go to law enforcement. And they seem to not even grasp that they have to physically pick. I think that's what Sergeant Cleffman said. You have to physically pick up the phone and call the police. And they just kind of kept saying, huh, yeah, what weird. We just didn't understand that.
Real quick, this is the danger of when you don't have accountability and you don't have like training, because I went through training and you learned about that kind of stuff, and you learned about clergy penitent privilege, and you had to understand what it was in order to even get, ordained. I understand the American, need for people to be able to organize in whatever way and separating religion, but it's like, it's just one of those, again, like those guardrails for everyone to take into account. Anyway, I apologize.
Another part of that video that was very illuminating to us, as Jessica says, was they said, has anyone ever explained the law to you? And they said no. And then the officer said, well, I know it's not true. I just listened to a recording of them explaining to you line by line. And that had been like 3 years earlier. Maybe even less. I can't recall. But the fact that they had been told about this before and were still sort of pleading ignorance, I think was telling as well. And sort of a shocking moment, I guess.
This is it's our last question, and I really appreciate it. Just everything that you both have.
Oh my goodness,
have offered. But given that this is a sexual abuse case, I'd love to just kind of get both of your takes. Like, we live in this era, where we're told to believe women, and I think for the most part that's a pretty good sort of like, mantra to live by. Yet, like, not. Oh, no,
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Got something ringing here.
That's fine. I can mute him. So my question is, like when we're told to believe women, and you as journalists have to go cover a story or investigate a story, that involves believe women, like what are some things that you think us as just general members of the public, could learn from, like, the way that you decide to take up a story about sexual abuse? Does that make sense? Like in essence, like help me better believe women when I'm told these things, because I think the natural instinct is to not want to necessarily sensationalize every single story. Like, you can't believe women 100% of the time, or whatever the case may be. So, like, just help me be a better advocate for women and sexual abuse. Oh wait, sorry, you're muted. I forgot I had muted you earlier.
I'm sorry. I think that's a really interesting question that Jessica and I discussed a lot, in terms of, like, when you're like there's an investigative reporter mantra that's like, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. You know what I mean? Like that's the way that we're taught to approach these things. But then, as you sort of say, I think that when you look at the Harvey Weinstein case and some of the cases over the past few years that have really, raised this issue, one of the things you can't ignore about that is, like, some of these women don't have a, they weren't listened to for so long that maybe there isn't that, like, public record or something that's that definitive proof, and that's sort of part of the problem. So that adds another layer to it that I don't necessarily know what the answer is, because you can't just in our business, take everything at someone's word, right? Like we need to apply a certain amount of scrutiny. to everything we're hearing. And I do think that so that kind of presents a difficult position. In this case, a lot of what we did we did everything we could to verify these stories. The fact that he had actually been convicted of assaulting many of these girls, made it a little bit easier because there's somewhat of a paper trail. But like we're looking for things like, are people's stories changing, or are they staying the same if they're interviewed several times over a period of 8 or 9 years? Is there anyone that they told us at the time we can talk to? Is there a police report, even if it didn't lead to charges because someone backed up? But is there some kind of record that they, tried to get it out there at the time? I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I do think that it's like, Jessica said, trust but verify before. I think that is the attitude that we use going into these types of stories. It's different for someone coming forward and just in posting on social media or an allegation or something like that, and if you as someone who sees that choose to believe it or not, I think that's a little bit of a different calculus than where we're putting that really high bar. I'll say that there's a lot of things that people told us in the story that I 100% believe, but we didn't feel like we had sometimes we look at stories like, what am I going to tell the judge in terms of how why we put this in the story? So we're looking for things that we can say. It's not just one person saying something that we couldn't verify. We're sort of trying to find those things that have the most evidence supporting it.
I guess I want to be like super careful about answering this question because you're talking to two people who work for an investigative news outlet where like facts are king, and we go above and beyond and overboard on verifying the facts in our stories. Like that's what ProPublica is known for. That's what we stake our entire reputations are. Like when it comes to sticking to verifiable facts, there's no one who's more obsessed with that than ProPublica is, almost to a fault. And I think that what counts as the threshold of sort of, I don't know, I don't even want to say believability, but just like basic confirmation in the realm of investigative journalism is not the same way you kind of conduct yourself just as a person. And so I think, I think one of the things that jumped out to us immediately when we started this reporting, just from looking at women's accounts that have never met, live in different parts of the country, have nothing in common, are all saying the exact same things happen to them. That's credit to law enforcement. We get to build on the very good work of the law enforcement agencies that worked on this case and see for ourselves, like, this is all incredibly consistent. Again, people who have nothing to do with each other are all saying the same things about this perpetrator. And then when they're talking to us, their stories just don't change. Now, so this is really tricky reporting. And I have like so much respect and admiration for the women who are willing to revisit this stuff. And I think that believability, credibility, respectability, all the buzzwords about this kind of crime, it's thorny. And sometimes, I have to take off my reporter hat and just be a person with the people that I'm interviewing, because if you're not coming into this with like a lot of trying to lead with a lot of humanity, then people can tell that you're kind of just using them for a story. And I don't want to be in that position either. So I don't know if that at all answered your question, but I think it's really tricky, and it's worth just saying, like, there's reporter Jessica and then there's just Jessica. So like these are we all contain multitudes.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, thanks so much for both of you guys. And before I let you go,
yeah, thank you.
Rumor has it ProPublica has a podcast coming out or something like that.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. So Andy and I did this project when I was still living and working in Minneapolis. And since the story was published, I have stepped into a new role. I'm now the host of ProPublica's forthcoming podcast. Don't ask me what it's called because I don't know. And we are launching this year, and I'm not going to say when about that either, but soon. And it's really going to be just a real ProPublica needed a place in audio, as you guys know well, the power of audio, about bringing our stories to a new audience, audio first, people who don't necessarily have the time or attention span to read a 5,000, 10,000 word written piece. And the show is really going to showcase the vital work of ProPublica reporters, who are some of the best investigative reporters in the business. We're all over the country. We cover all kinds of beats. We cover the administration. We cover religion. We cover politics. We cover agriculture. We cover tech. We cover it all. So it's going to be a show where you actually get to kind of come inside ProPublica a little bit, learn a little bit more about who we are and how we do our jobs, and also just get to hear some just fascinating behind the scenes stuff about what it takes to do these stories. So I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited for you too.
So cool.
And Andy, what's next for you in Minnesota?
Good question. I mean,
What's next for anyone in Minnesota right now?
The news cycle here is
What's next for Minnesota?
Yeah.
It's moving quickly. By the time this comes out, I'm sure everything I said at the top of the podcast will be irrelevant. It's hard, it's hard. I mean, so to answer your question, first of all, we are doing another story on OALC. So we're doing a story that is going to be a follow-up to the one that Jessica and I are talking about today, coming out the exact same time as the podcast, meaning
TBD.
I have no idea. TBD. I am working on a story that I hope will be out this week on some of the stuff that's happening in Minnesota and other parts of the country with ICE, and it's for an investigative news organization. It's hard to jump into a story that's moving so quickly, because it's like you identify a target and then the whole landscape has changed by the time you get it out. But the story of ICE and the Trump administration and what's happening in Minneapolis is, I think, kind of the story of America today. You're seeing the political and personal divisions as well as a lot of unity. And I think that all of those dynamics are gonna, there's a lot of good stories in there that we've got no shortage of hot takes and analysis. What I'm really interested in and what ProPublica is interested in is breaking through the noise and finding fact-based stories that are, maybe not what you've read elsewhere. So I know that's very vague, but hopefully starting.
No, it's great.
We'll start to have, we'll be. ProPublica's already done some really great stuff covering this, but now that I'm here and in place, I've been, as you said, at the Star Tribune doing this work there, and I'm excited to be able to be the link in the chain here in Minneapolis, where all of this stuff is happening, and contribute to that reporting.
Cool. That's really awesome. And again, thank you both for doing what you do. We know that journalism is a tough and a thankless job. And we're big supporters of journalism and journalists here on the show. So just thanks for everything. And and thanks to our audience for showing up again. And as always, make sure you keep your conversations not right or left, but up. And we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.